Good afternoon. My name is Jay Rothman, and welcome to Real Men, Real Talk Raw. It is Sunday morning in the United States. Good morning, good afternoon. If you're coming in from the East Coast, it is, in fact, 1 p.m. We did have the switch of the clocks overnight or through the night. We actually, all the states in the U.S. went back 1 hour, so you picked up an hour of sleep, which means that my guest today is, he's well rested, I'm sure, because he picked up an hour of sleep. I, on the other hand, Arizona, I believe, is the only state on the mainland of the U.S. that does not go to daylight savings time. So for me, it's still the same time as it was yesterday at this time. If you are coming in from overseas, welcome to the studio. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us live in this moment. I'd like to welcome to the studio Jason Berv, coming in from Colorado. Welcome.
Thanks, Jay. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you this morning.
So, Jason, how you and I met was indirect. I got a hit on Dicken Bettinger, is a friend of mine. Dicken and I met a couple of years ago. I was signed up to do a weekend workshop, and he was one of the facilitators. He was joined by two others, and Rohini, as well as Barb Patterson. I don't know if you know those two women, or if you've met them or not, but Dickens showed up, and he did an amazing job in this workshop of teaching, facilitating the topic that we were in for. And most recently, I noticed that in his feed, he was thanking you, Jason, because he had just participated, I believe, in a workshop retreat that you had done at your home. I believe you live close to Aspen, Colorado. And I was like, who is this Jason Berv from Colorado? I want to get to know you better. And so we did just that. We connected. We had a video chat conversation, and invited you into the studio because I thought that your story is one of importance for men and women to hear in the United States and overseas, because there's not a whole lot of differentiation between how we choose to live in modern society today, whether it be here, Australia, the UK, anywhere in Europe, even in Asia. We are all just trying to figure out how to live this thing called life on life's terms, and do it in a way that actually is healthy and is rewarding instead of surviving. We all really want to just be thriving. But the roadmap to get there is not so simple as it appears. And so welcome to the studio, Jason.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate being here. And I'm so glad that you had a chance to meet those folks. They're some of my favorite people in the world, Dick and Barb and Rohini.
I would like to invite you, as I begin to share out on some of the different channels, to maybe just go back a little bit in time and share what your life was like before you went through, let's say, a rebirthing of sorts. Rewiring of your brain. Some refer to it as biohacking, and what life was like prior, and how it's changed for you, and the work that you are doing today that's brought you to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Well, it was a little more than 16 years ago. I was living in Boulder, Colorado. I was just finishing up graduate school, and I had it in my mind that I was going to start a school. At the time, my wife and we met in graduate school. I had been on the fast track at a very young age. I got into the senior administration at the country's largest boarding school at the time. And I was really excited to finish up graduate school, and couldn't wait to bring all these great ideas that I'd been encountering about education to life. And so I was launching this school. And this couple reached out to me and to my wife and said, hey, we've done this before. We've started a school before, and we love what you're up to, and we wonder if we could work with you. And so we ended up talking, and long story short, I ended up hiring them. And they said, shortly after we hired them, they said, if we're going to really be successful working together, we think that you need to go meet with this mentor of ours named Dicken Bettinger. And my wife and I said, about what? And they said, well, I don't think we should tell you. I think you should just go experience it for yourself. And we weren't quite sure what to expect, but we had tremendous respect for these folks we hired. And so we went out and met with Dickin for a few days. And Jay, it really did feel like kind of starting over with my life fresh. I had an experience talking to Dickin where I realized that what I thought was true about life and success and hard work was I had completely backwards. And so leading up to that moment, you know, my marriage to my wife had started out just with in the most magical way. But shortly before we met with Dickin, things had really hit a rough patch. And after we met with Dickin, that was maybe 16 years ago.
Wow.
And I have to say that I haven't spent one single day working on my marriage since then. And I think I have the best marriage in the world. I'm so madly in love with my wife, and things have just been incredibly effortless and filled with beauty and joy ever since we met with Dickin 16 years ago.
Now that's quite the testimonial, because, you know, so many times we hear people say relationships are hard. Relationships can be really difficult. And, you know, I experienced that. I was in a relationship for 30 years, married to my ex-wife, and it was difficult. It was complicated. It was hard. That's quite the testimonial. Well, I'd like to deep dive into that in a little bit, but I do want to go back, because when I asked you for your bio, you actually highlighted 3 areas, and each one of them could be a conversation within itself that could probably be an hour long. But I'd like to just touch on each one of them. The first one that you shared was going from type A to type B in reference to your personality type. Now, what did that mean for you? What did life look like as a type A personality? And how is it different today as a type B?
Yeah.
Because is it really the personality that's changed, or is it something else within that's changed?
Well, I think it's what shows up on the outside, which people often call our personalities. And so, you know, if you go back 10 or 15 years, even after I had met with Dickin and encountered what is commonly known as the 3 principles, when I showed up at work, I was intense. That's the one word that if you asked anyone who knew me, who worked with me, who talked to me, you know, Jason is so intense. And I was just going a million miles an hour. I was working 80, 90 hours a week. I really thought that the answer was the harder I work, you know, and the more that I do and the faster that I do it, you know, then the more likely I would be to encounter success. And, you know, if you see me today, you know, most folks, intense is not at the top of the list of words that they use to describe me today. You know, most folks think I'm really mellow, really easygoing. Thankfully, you know, a lot of folks have given me the feedback that I'm very kind and thoughtful. But those were not words that used to describe me before I really developed a deeper understanding of the 3 principles.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, how would you say, going from type A to type B, you used the word success. You thought it was type A meant you'll be more successful. I also heard you say, if I may paraphrase you, that what you learned was what you thought was the truth may in fact not be the truth. And what you thought was a lie may in fact be the truth.
Yeah.
What did that mean for you? How did that, what was it that you thought was the truth that in fact was not the truth for you?
Yeah. Well, Jay, you know, one way of thinking about it is that I think I had what looks to me now like really superstitious thinking. You know, superstitious thinking to me, I live in this great ski town in Colorado. And, you know, folks here will say, you know, hey, if we do the snow dance, then it'll snow, right? And I'm not sure if any of them actually believe that, but if they did, you know, you and I might call that superstitious thinking, you know, and if they do the dance long enough, well, it'll start snowing and they'll say, well, see, it was due to the snow dance. But you and I know that it's not due to the snow dance. It's just, if you wait long enough in a mountain town in Colorado, it's going to snow. in the winter, right? Well, that I think is one way of understanding that. I used to think that if I put in the hours, if I was just constantly scanning the environment for opportunities, if I was just, up early and, if I could get to the end of my email list, the mythical end of the email list, if I could do all those things. And so I was just constantly on the treadmill. I figured that would result in the success I was looking for. And what I didn't realize was that that's not the source of success. Just like that's not the source of the snow. The snow is going to happen eventually. Well, when I quiet down, when I open up to new possibilities, that's when I've had the most success. So what I didn't realize was that I've always been an avid mountain biker. And even when I was type A, I would go out for a ride. Now, the way I'd go out for a ride was, Strava, I'm going to get the fastest time anyone's ever had on this trail. But nevertheless, even while I was doing that, there was something else at work where my mind would quiet down over the course of that bike ride. And I didn't give that much credit at all. I just thought, hey, look at me. I had a great ride. I checked that one off. But what I didn't realize was that there was something else going on that was behind whatever success I was having at the time. But by being type A and going, I eventually hit a wall. And I ended up having some serious health issues because I feel like my body, my wisdom was trying to tell me, hey, you're barking up the wrong tree. I ended up, I remember very vividly one day I used to bike to work. And I lived high up in the mountains, and I would bike down to the town in Boulder, and it wasn't all downhill. So there was some uphill too. And I just remember one day my legs just felt like bricks, and I couldn't believe it. And lo and behold, what was going on was I was developing asthma, and then I lost my sense of smell, and then I got allergic to a dozen different things. And so that was the beginning of my wake up call. If I can flash forward a few years later, you mentioned Barb Patterson. She played a really significant role in my life because I was seeking out her mentoring, and I was meeting with her a number of years ago. And even when I was, becoming a coach, I was still bringing an element of this type A, this go, this get it right approach. And I'll never forget that Barb and I were debriefing a client session that she observed that I was leading. And she said to me in the most neutral way, she said, "You think you're the smartest guy in the room, don't you?" And I said, "No, don't be ridiculous." She said, "No, really, I get the feeling that you think you're the smartest guy in the room." And I said, "Well, maybe once in a while." And she said, "No, really, I think you think you're the smartest guy in the room." And I had to get really humble, Jay, because what I realized was I thought that the way to success was through my intellect, through my effort. And what came crashing in on me, it was not something Barb said, it was something that I saw for myself, was that because I had been approaching life in a certain way, I was missing the opportunity to connect deeply with people. And when I saw that I was missing over and over again. So why was it that I wasn't more connected to the people I worked with? Why was it that I wasn't more connected to the people that I wanted to be friends with? Why was it that I felt this growing loneliness in my life? And to me, it all came crashing in when I saw that I was doing this superstitious thinking and thinking that, the way to get things done, the way to get the prize in life was just to work harder than everybody else and to use my intellect and, see if I could be smarter than everyone else.
I want to honor you, take a moment just to honor you here, Jason, because this show's platform was launched, Real Men, Real Talk Raw. It was an opportunity. I had this vision of men stepping forward, stepping in to the studio so that we could have a conversation where we step into our own truths, what we thought was true, and what we have learned through our own journey of healing, journey of understanding self-discovery, who we truly are, and what truly is important in our life. And by you sharing what you just shared, I want to just thank you for showing up today, because this is what it's about. This is not just about Jason Berv or my own story, which right now is running very parallel to yours. But being able to share with other men and women that have been chasing a dream, yeah, through thinking that we could think our way there, thinking that if we just work harder, if we just do more, if we just work longer hours, if we just show up with that intensity, that we will have success in life. And, here comes a big question for you: is what was your definition of success as that type A personality?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I understood the definition until I bumped into it a few years later. And I saw it in a piece of writing by this great coach named Michael Neal. Mm-hmm. And what he shared was that we grow up with an understanding that success is the product of capacity, our own personal capacity, plus effort. And that rang so true for me, because it looked to me like, yeah, if I was going to have success, it came down to one of those two things. Either I needed to improve myself and keep working on myself to expand my personal capacity, or if I had done that and I had really, come a long way improving myself, well, then it was about effort and hard work and discipline and sticking with it and, picking myself up by the bootstraps and getting up and going for it. And what I saw was that that's what I internalized. That's what I grew up with. That's what so many of us grow up with in our world. And that for me, I just hit a dead end one day where I realized I can't improve myself or work harder on myself because I'm out of gas. I'm completely burned out. I've got, no place left to go. I just felt like I could barely get out of bed. And so that's my story. And I feel like that story's been echoed by so many of the clients that I meet with now, who are in their working lives in the corporate world, and they're burnt out. And they're saying, look, I thought the same thing. I thought that was the formula for success, but it doesn't look like that's the formula to me anymore.
What does type B look like? How is type B different than type A? Because you're living in type B.
Yeah. Well, Michael Neal also offered a second formula, and I'd say that, I'm not sure I can do any better than he can in terms of capturing it. So he said, that the formula that actually is true 100% of the time is that success equals our infinite capacity minus interference. And so, that there was an explosion that went off in my head when I heard that, Jay, because what I realized was all the things that I'd been doing to try and improve myself, to try and work on myself, to try and get the right answer, to try and do life right, they were all in the category of interference. And the quieter my mind, the more that infinite capacity would show up all on its own. And so to me, that, that's the difference. So now type B means I still get to go out on bike rides, and some days I still want to, get the fastest time, but other days I like to do what my wife calls tootling, and just experience the beauty. So now I get to explore the whole range of the gearbox instead of thinking that overdrive is really where I need to live all the time, right? So type B for me means I have way more freedom in my life to experience the same things that I used to only experience one way. Now I can experience them lots of different ways.
If I may paraphrase, what I heard you say is how it used to be was your gearbox was in high speed. And whether you were going up or you were going down that mountain in Colorado, you were full speed. You were in it to win it. And you were creating your own challenges for yourself that were not only were they unnecessary, but they were hurtful, because as you were as you were chasing, as you were speeding to get to that destination, you were missing all the gifts along the way. And I suspect that when you went down lower in your gears and you just slowed down long enough to be able to really see all that that path had right there in front of you, including nature, including wildlife, including connecting with yourself, your world changed, your world opened up, and you realized that it was no longer the speed at which you raced. It was what you got out of being on that path that made all the difference in the world. You got to experience life in a different way.
Yeah. That's a beautiful paraphrase. Thanks, Jay. Yeah. Yeah. You know, what to me, what I started to see was that I can still go in overdrive if that's what makes sense. But, you know, but just like, I don't know, use whatever analogy makes sense to you with, you know, with a vehicle that has a motor, right? You know, I live on a ranch, and so I drive ranch equipment, you know. Now there are times when I'm driving my tractor and it makes sense to go faster. But boy, if I'm trying to do certain operations and I'm not slowing it down, well, yeah, I'm going to do some damage, you know? And so
Yeah.
that's what's made more sense to me, is that freedom to experience the full range of gears has opened up so many new possibilities. And I've been able to see the experiences of my life with richness that wasn't there before. So, you know, that even extends to my kids. I've got 2 teenage boys, and, you know, the way I used to relate to them was very different than the way I relate to them now. And that, you know, dad still, you know, operates in overdrive, but they also know that dad operates in a very slow gear sometimes too. And I get to tune in to see, well, what's it like to interact with them from these different gears, and which one's appropriate, and how does it feel? Does it feel good or not? And so I just get to get the feedback from life about which gear might make sense right now.
Beautiful. Beautiful. You mentioned that your relationship with your wife, you've been together 20 years now. I believe, if I did my math right, you were in your marriage about 4 years when you first were introduced to Dick and Bettinger, who in fact has been a prior guest on Real Men, Real Talk 2 times now. And I just love Dick, and he's just an incredible man that has his own backstory that's very powerful. How has your relationship with your wife, as well as you just touched on your children, how has it changed when you shifted down from high gear to a slower gear?
Yeah. Well, here's how it looks to me, Jay. So, you know, when I was in that former mindset of thinking that success was really about personal capacity plus effort, well, I applied that to my marriage. So a successful marriage necessarily involved effort and, you know, working on ourselves, right? And what happened for us was that when I first met my wife, you know, there's even more of a backstory. Before I met my wife, I was anticipating going to grad school. And I had this, I don't know what to call it. I had like a vision. And I remember very vividly sitting at a friend's kitchen table and telling her, hey, I had this image come to my mind of this woman I'm going to marry. And I described it in great detail. And when I ended up going to graduate school, the very first day of class, in walks this woman who fits this description perfectly. And sure enough, that's the woman I end up marrying. So there was something really fated in my world about meeting my wife. And so because of that, I just knew that I'd met my soulmate. So here we were in graduate school. I think life's pretty good when you're a graduate student. You know, we were teaching and learning, and life was great. Lots of time to go for hikes with our dogs. But then after graduate school, after we graduated and we launched this school, we also started having kids. And our kids, like maybe some other people are familiar with, they just didn't sleep. So what I mean by that is they would wake up every 45 minutes all night long for years. Okay. So I was a zombie. So here I am, I'm tired. I'm working 80, 90 hours a week trying to launch this new enterprise. And our marriage really suffered because I believed all my thinking. And I thought that if we were having trouble, it was that my wife wasn't understanding me, or she was saying or doing things that were upsetting me. And so we really need to work on it. And we just ended up arguing all the time. And we had, what lives on in infamy as the zoo fight. We're in the parking lot of the zoo and the kids are screaming in the back seat and we're just screaming at each other, And what changed, Jay, was when we went out to meet with Dickin, he shared something with us that had never occurred to me before, which is that the content of our thinking is not where it's at. It's understanding that we think. It's understanding the nature of thought, and that the quality of our thinking is always changing. Like the weather, it's constantly going up and down, and the quality of our thinking is really the key variable in our experience of life in the moment. And in a heartbeat, just like that, I saw that all the trouble I've been having in my marriage was because I'd been trying to have this relationship from a really low state of mind. I was such a pain in the ass. I used to say, we are not going to bed until we work out this argument. So we'd be arguing until the wee hours. And my wife would just be like, please make it stop, And I was just like a dog with a bone. And, the way it works for most people is the deeper you get into it, the more you're just slinging junk at each other. And there's no merit to that. So we were coming at each other from this really low quality of thought. Yeah. And it was like barfing all over each other and saying, well, don't you see it my way now? And so for me to get the perspective, get the insight that it's not, I don't have to believe everything I think. That was revolutionary for me. And it's no exaggeration to say my marriage changed overnight. And from that point forward, I was able to see when the quality of my thinking was low, I just didn't have to believe it. It only was telling me that my state of mind was having a natural fluctuation. It wasn't telling me about my wife. It wasn't telling me about my marriage. It was just telling me that I'm going through a normal up and down. And that really saved my marriage because we were on very, very thin ice. And it saved
at this point, Jason, you were probably in your mid to late 20s, I suspect.
I was in my early 30s. Yeah.
Okay. So you're in your early 30s. You have this moment of this epiphany, this new understanding that has now been shared by Dickin. And you make it sound, you said like overnight, everything changed. Now, you're a coach today. You coach a lot of people, as do I. We touch a lot of lives through the work we do. Most people want to believe that it's like a light switch. I'm working with a gal right now in town that she sent me a note the other day for a check-in, and she said, wow, I thought it was going to be so much easier than it is. It's like, and she's in her 50s, and she's almost beating herself up because she's like, okay, I get the concept, but I'm still locked into my behaviors that I've been doing for decades, obviously since her 20s. And so how could it be so simple? Because we just can't flip the switch on and off. Like, okay, I got the concept, and from now on, I'm gonna, as soon as I go to this thought that is not healthy for me or my relationship, I'm gonna dismiss it. How were you able to turn that switch on and off so easily when it appears to be that much more challenging for most people?
Well, to me, it really comes down to that understanding that we all have access to this infinite capacity, and we're all really good at getting in our own way. And that just made a ton of sense to me. And so the way it looks to me now, the way I share it with clients these days is in just a really ordinary, everyday way. I say, look, when do you do your best thinking without even trying? You know, maybe your listeners can give that some thought, right? What I hear over and over and over again, I've asked thousands of people this question now. You know, I hear people say, well, it's when I'm out walking my dog. It's when I'm taking a shower. It's when I'm driving to work. Early in the morning when I'm the only one up and I've got my cup of coffee, you know. And what I think that points to, I ask folks, well, what would explain that? What would explain that? That's when you do your best thinking without even trying. And that's the key for me, without even trying. And, you know, people say, well, it just came from out of the blue. And I say, well, what's the blue, right? We're all tapped into something where good ideas just arise. They just come to us. And so when we start to see that, there's a real freedom in understanding that it's not about working harder. That's what I used to think. I'll just lean into this. I'll really bear down on it. And I started to see that it was when I would lean away from it. So then, you know, what typically happens when I'm working with clients is the next step for them is they say, okay, great. Well, now how do I manage that? You know, because I don't want to be, I'd love more great ideas. You know, how do I open up to that? And really that's when the conversation gets fun and interesting, because I invite people to start to notice what their state of mind looks and feels like throughout the day, throughout the week. And over time, what my clients see, some immediately, some it takes longer, is that we can think we're in charge of our thinking and our state of mind. But when we really start to step back and notice, well, that's just such a small part of the day that we're actually exercising that control. There's all this huge swaths of our day where we're not even thinking about it. And our state of mind is doing its thing anyway. And we're not thinking about growing our hair, and, you know, we're not thinking about beating our heart. You know, we're not in charge of all that. And we're not in charge of the fact that our state of mind is constantly going in and out. And so that's what made the difference for me, is seeing how it really works and seeing how I had misunderstood that it was up to me and that I needed to manage it. So if I find myself, which I do all the time, getting caught up in my thinking and I'm not having access to my best thought, well, then I'll do what occurs to me. It's not always the same thing. Sometimes it's, well, geez, I need to go for a walk. Sometimes it's, I just need to carry on with my day and my life. Sometimes it's, I'm going to distract myself. Sometimes it's, well, not much to be done. I'm just going to carry on. I know this will pass because it always does. So there's not one answer to the question of what do I do? It's really far more important, in my estimation, to really understand the way we're wired and the way it works, because it takes all the responsibility off of our shoulders for managing our thinking and managing the trajectory of our lives. It's not up to us.
You mentioned going outside. One of the things that has worked for you and continues to is to be outside. How much does movement play in your capacity or someone other's capacity to get out of the thoughts, the obsessive thinking, the racing of the mind?
Yeah.
How much has movement impacted your own healing journey and new way of living?
Yeah. Well, you know, a lot, Jay, a lot. And, you know, I've always been an athlete and I've always loved being outdoors. It's why I live in Colorado. And the reason why now it has made such a big difference to me is because, as I shared with you in an earlier story, I used to be really enamored with my intellect. I worked really hard at it. I got a lot of education. I got my Ph.D. And, you know, all throughout that training, it's, you know, basically how to become more and more in love with your own thinking. you know? And so for me, what exercise and being in the wilderness, being outdoors really does for me is it helps me get out of my head. And just like I said a moment ago with the doing my best thinking without even trying, I get some of my best ideas during or immediately after a bike ride or a ski workout or just a hike in the woods. Now, what I want to say to folks is, if you're like me and you feel called to be outside, well, that's wonderful, and I can understand that. But what is available to us is that there are as many different ways to clear our minds as there are people. And so, when I talk to my clients, I don't say, well, geez, you need to start mountain biking. And they say, look, no, thanks. I point them instead to say, well, how do you already find in your life these moments of quiet, of clarity? And I love the variety of what I hear. So for some people it's, I listen to music. Some people it's knitting. Some people it's exercise. Some people it's making music. There's an endless array. And so, so anytime anyone wants to come join me in Colorado for a ski or a bike, come on out, but please don't feel obligated.
You know what, Jason, I'll see you next week. I'm on my way.
All right, let's do it.
It only takes me less than 15 minutes to pack a bag.
Let's do it.
Be careful what you wish for. And I mean it in all sincerity. I'd love to come out and visit and see your ranch and maybe spend a day or two, a couple of days. And I asked about the movement because there's a difference between movement and exercise. At least the society that I grew up in, which is the same as yours, we have this notion that we believe, the belief system is that, well, if we want to be well, we have to exercise. That's why they call it a workout, because for many of us, including how I used to interpret exercise, it was work. It was something that I didn't enjoy. I really, like many people, we join the gyms, we join the exercise clubs, and we're in it for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And the new year is the time of the year where they see a spike, a climb in memberships. And by middle of February, the beginning of March, it really heads down and they see less people coming. And then people continue the membership for a year or two. And eventually they stop it because they're feeling more guilt and shame about not going than about, because paying it each month is a reminder of what they're not doing. And so for me, I found that I don't want to ever refer to what I do as exercise. It's not. It's truly, it's not a workout. What I do is I just move. Initially I started moving by just walking. I walked every day. And I continue to walk every day, whether it be, after dinner for a couple of miles or in the morning when I'm hiking on a trail, but I'm walking, I'm not running. I'm not doing anything significantly. I'm not jogging. I'm not jumping out of airplanes yet. But I keep active. I physically move, and through movement, that for me is where a lot of my answers come from within, not from up here in my thoughts, but as I describe it, it bubbles up or they pop. It just comes, and it's coming from within. And why that happens is part of movement is that our brain naturally releases hormones. Now, there's many different hormones that we release, but when we're in movement, when we're in flow, when we're physically moving in some capacity, we release the hormones dopamine and also serotonin. Of course, there's the negative hormones when we're not moving, when we're just in consistent thought. When we're in consistent thought, we go to worry or fear, we go into fight or flight. There's cortisol that is now being released. That's the fight or flight. We're in the sympathetic or parasympathetic mode. There's so much going on that we're not aware of, that when we're moving, our brain is releasing the healthy hormones, which actually helps relax us, actually helps us shut off some of our thinking. And that's where our answers come to us. So movement is so critical because it's actually of body is physically going through some significant exchange of healthy good.
Yeah. Yeah, Jay, I really appreciate that. And I want to mention something else, if I could, about movement versus exercise, because I've watched some of your other shows, and I know that you know a lot about healthy movement and healthy eating. And I mentioned earlier that I kind of hit the wall and had some health issues, health crises, and so I kind of went in search of what's a healthier way to live. And I ended up doing CrossFit, and I ended up eating paleo and primal. And, I really enjoyed what I was learning about. There are actually some things that we've taken for granted as conventional wisdom about fitness and about food that really may not be true. And so I've loved digging into some of the ancestral health pioneers, because they're really research-based, and what they're saying makes sense for our bodies. And in terms of the movement, you alluded to how unhealthy it is to sit for 8 or 9 hours a day and then go to the gym and put in a really intense workout and think that's that's really healthy for us. Now, it's healthier than not exercising at all. But what I started to see as I got deeper into, well, what are the assumptions I've been making about healthy eating and what is actually true? So, I was surprised when I started eating paleo and how I used to think it was calories in versus calories out. Now, all of a sudden, as an athlete, I was eating an outrageous number of really healthy paleo diet calories, and I was losing weight like crazy. And, the same thing with movement. When I started looking at what's the movement that makes sense for my body, that's nutritious movement, right? And then in my coaching, Jay, I had kind of this epiphany, which was that we have an assumption that's really kind of like these other assumptions about movement and eating, that anxiety and stress comes from outside of us, comes from our circumstances. And to me, that looks, for all the tea in China, like superstitious thinking, right? These days, because I see that that's not actually where stress and anxiety comes from. And that if we really want a healthy relationship with stress and anxiety, then we get to look at the dynamics of thought, not the content of thought, but the nature of thought and how thought works, and see that our experience of circumstances always is coming from the inside out. And that made just as much sense to me as what I saw about a better way to move and a better way to eat. So just wanted to share that.
You talk about depression and anxiety. One of the first questions I ask a new prospect or client that I'm going to work with is, how much water are you drinking in a day? And 99% of the time I get the same answer, and it's not enough. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, give me an idea. How much do you think? How many ounces of water? And they're like, well, do we include coffee in that? What about Coke or Diet Coke? Do we include that? And the answer is no, we don't. Yeah. And typically the answer has been the same. It's about not enough. And, well, give me a number. 8 to 20 ounces of water is about what I drink on average. Now, if we understand that the brain is 80% water, now if we are only drinking 8 ounces of water a day, and the rule of thumb today is we should be drinking half of our body weight in ounces. So, for example, if you weigh 150 pounds, you should be drinking 75 ounces of water. But then you have to add on to that, if you're drinking, let's say, a Venti, 20 ounces of Starbucks coffee a day, you got to add another 20 ounces of water minimum into your intake. So now you're at 95 ounces for every cup of coffee you have, you've got to add more water. My point being is that depression is a state of mind, I believe, as is anxiety, can be reversed, can be healed alone just through changing nutrition. And the first place that I start with a client is where we are basically living in our brain where all thoughts come from, which perpetuates and creates depressive thoughts and thinking and feelings behind that, is we are living with a dry brain, literally. When a sponge is not wet, how well does it perform? It performs way better when it's wet. And so our thinking is impacted. Our thoughts and our feelings are impacted when we're not. It's like if you think about your vehicle, if you're not fueling your vehicle with enough oil, what happens to your engine over time? Its ability to perform well becomes more and more limited. And eventually, if you don't fill up reboot your engine with new oil, change the filter, fuel your engine is going to blow. It's going to blow up. It's going to catch fire. How do I know that? Because I did that one time. And how do I know about the brain's ability to perform? Because I lived with generalized anxiety disorder for many, many, many years. Most of my life, I was diagnosed in 95, and I was on psych meds for 21 years for chronic anxiety. How much water was I drinking a day? If I was touching 8 ounces, it was a lot. But I certainly was drinking, my 40 ounces of Starbucks Venti a day. And in between the coffee, I was drinking probably 3 to 6 Diet Cokes a day. Yeah. How could I not be living in a constant state of anxiety? I wasn't doing anything to help nourish my body, my vital organs that was screaming for help. Well, as soon as I had my awakening and I began to understand how much I was hurting myself through lack of nutrition and lack of knowledge, everything changed. Within 3 months, I was off my psych meds for anxiety, and psych meds for anxiety was basically antidepressants. I was off them within 3 months, and I don't have chronic anxiety anymore. Yeah, and so nutrition is such a big part of it. It's huge.
Well, Jay, what else I really appreciate about what you're pointing to is that, there are symptoms and there are causes. And if we're constantly chasing after our symptoms, well, then we're going to get stuck in that cycle of trying to deal with our symptoms all the time. And I would say one of the most helpful insights that I've had and that I get to share with my clients is what symptom and what's cause with our moods. What's symptom and what's cause with our anxiety, right? So I like to share with people that state of mind is something that it's normal and natural that it's fluctuating all the time. And whenever we're what I call below the line with state of mind, there are very predictable symptoms. So if you have a head cold, you're very likely to have the same symptoms that I'd have if I have a head cold. Well, if you're below the line with your state of mind, if anyone's below the line, well, they're very likely to have the same symptoms. Now, that list is fairly lengthy. For me, I can say, well, I notice I lose my sense of humor. I take things personally. I feel like a victim. I have a short fuse. I lose my sense of hope and possibility. And on, right? Now, if we understand that those are symptoms, not causes. I used to see those things as causes, so I better get to work on them. Right. Now I see that that's just a symptom of my state of mind, which is naturally going up and down. And when my state of mind, if it doesn't look like a problem, well, then it just goes through that cycle and it starts coming back up again. And when I'm above the line, I have very predictable symptoms, just like you and a million, billion other people, right? And those symptoms look to me like I start to feel more hopeful. I start to have a sense of possibility. I feel more connected to people. My sense of humor comes back. I feel more love and gratitude. So when folks, I've had so many clients come to me say, "Well, I'm going to work on my gratitude journal," and I say, "Well, feel free." But I'm just saying that sometimes it's going to feel like hard work and sometimes it's going to come naturally, right? And that's a product of looking at causes, not symptoms. If we force ourselves to feel grateful, well, it's going to feel a lot harder when we're below the line. So anyway, I really like that you're pointing to causes versus symptoms.
No doubt. I used to spend a lot of time with tissues because I had colds a lot. And then that turned into sinus infections quite often. I had chronic sinusitis for decades. And of course, that eventually led into bronchitis. And what I did was I was a sad dieter, standard American diet, as well as I was hooked. I was a pharmaceutical junkie. I was hooked on pharmaceuticals. I ran as quickly as I could in high gear to the doctor for more pharmaceuticals because I didn't want to get sicker, but I was already sick and I was just treating the symptoms. Well, it wasn't until I hit my rock bottom in health and my body was shutting down and I was near death that I realized that I spent my whole life just treating symptoms. And I was not looking at what was the root cause of each one of these diseases or illnesses, acute and chronic, that my body had embraced and I was now living in constantly. And once I understood that I needed to go inward and stop treating the symptom of a cold and really examine what was my behavior that was creating the perfect storm to catch the cold. Was it that I needed to buy another can of Lysol or use antibacterial soap? I used to have those in my car. I had them in my home. I had them in my business case. I couldn't get enough of them. And God, when I went to a business convention and some of those vendors was giving out those antibacterial soaps, I loaded up on those. I was good for a couple of years. I had enough inventory to last for a couple of years. And here's the truth. None of it worked. I still got sick as a dog every 6 weeks. Why? Because I wasn't looking at the root cause of disease. I wasn't looking at what was really impacting my life. And once I gave away all that stuff, I threw it away, I gave it away, and I gave away all the old habits that were no longer serving me, my life began to improve, every aspect, mind, body, and the heart space and the soul.
Yeah.
And it didn't take work. It wasn't that it was that difficult to do. It didn't feel like work. Why? Because I was committed to it. Why? Because I finally understood that I was causing all of my own problems, if I may call it that. I was creating the perfect environment for disease. No one had done it to me. I had done it to myself.
Yeah.
And it was time for me to, let's say, grow up and learn how to take care of myself, because I had been waiting. I waited my whole life for someone to take care of me. First, it was my mom, and then it was my wife. 54 years of my life waiting for somebody to take care of my needs, and me ignoring what my basic needs of living were. But I was doing a great job chasing that American dream as a modern American man. It didn't work so well, and nor did it for you, Jason. And so I've really enjoyed this conversation that we've had today, because it's not just about turning off the thoughts. It's not just about understanding that thoughts come and go. It's not just about what we process through our mind. It's basically really looking at ourself as a whole. It's not just the mind, but it's how we're treating ourselves. It's what we're doing or what we're not doing to help ourselves become the best version of ourselves, which in reality is we don't have to go outside to find it. You mentioned earlier on in this conversation that you were chasing a dream and you were working like a crazy man, as did I, for years. But you felt empty inside. You felt hollow. You were sad. I had that same experience for decades. It didn't matter how much money I made. It didn't matter what my title became. It didn't matter how many years I was married. It didn't matter how many children I had. At the end of the day, I was hurting, and I felt very alone inside myself. And it wasn't until I started to explore, as did you did, way earlier in your life than I did. You were in your 30s when you seeked and you found the true meaning of what life is about. You were gifted that. It didn't happen for me until I was 54 years old. But some of us don't even get it in this lifetime. We have to come back perhaps another time to start over from ground zero. But I love what you've shared today. I would like to touch, believe it or not, we are almost coming up on the hour. I would like to invite you, Jason, to perhaps share, if someone is listening to us right now in this conversation, what closing thoughts would you have for them if they feel like their life is not where they want it to be? What are some, maybe perhaps 3 different things that you would suggest? Where can they start to impact change in their own life?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Well, I'd say for starters, it would be to open up to what else is possible. Because I think without a sense of hope for change, very little does change. And in your story, I hear that theme really prominently, that you kept at it, but it wasn't until you had an insight, an experience of hopefulness, that things really started to change. So I would say the most important thing for folks is to know that it's possible to change, because that sense of hope makes all the difference. Now, after that, I would say, this question that I asked earlier about when do you do your best thinking without even trying, points to the fact that we are connected to something really vast, really powerful, that we all have access to, especially when we get out of our own way. And so I would say the more people can just notice how that's already taking place in their own lives, how they already have access to that, because that points in the direction of that we are not just a sum total of our personality and our effort and working on ourselves, but that at any moment we have access to tapping into this vast source of great ideas, of insight, of love and connection, of new beginnings. And so that awareness really makes a difference. And then, from there, our conversation about causes versus symptoms, for me, a deeper understanding of the cause of my life was really exploring what is, the 3 principles, exploring this philosophy known as the 3 principles, which really explains. It's not a prescription. It doesn't tell us what to do, but it describes how it is that we create our reality moment to moment. And the more we understand how that works, the more things start to happen in our lives where we open up to new possibility, where we experience change, where we experience serendipity, where we experience love and connection. So that would be my list. But the most important is that starting point of allowing for the possibility of change and feeling hope.
Beautiful. I love what you shared, Jason. You talk about change, and what it really came down and comes down for us is having the courage. What we're not willing to do today, we tend to put it off to tomorrow, because that's where our thought goes. So you know what? I'll start tomorrow. And the reality is for some of us, tomorrow is Groundhog's Day. It never comes. It comes, but we just keep repeating the same thoughts. Over 90% of the thoughts that go through our mind in a 24-hour period are repeated the next day. And so for me, the best way to break the cycle of the old thoughts that keep repeating is by distracting myself through distracting of the thoughts, and understanding that most of the thoughts become a story. We have the story that we keep telling ourselves about ourselves based on our circumstances, based on our environment, based on our belief system. And when we begin to understand, and I believe that the 3 principles is aligned with this, is that it's just our thoughts. Our thoughts are not real, but we create a reality around them. And it's almost like our thoughts are a story that we create through our perspective. And eventually, if we repeat it enough, it will become our reality. It's that partly self-fulfilling prophecy. There's also self-sabotage in there. And behind the majority of our thoughts that we're not willing to work on through distraction is that there's fear behind it. Partially it's like, well, if I stop behaving this way, then who am I? I used to hear that in a lot of the rooms I went to for 12-step work early on in my own healing journey for codependency. I'd hear people say, well, if I actually stop behaving this way, I won't know who I am. And I'm afraid of that. Like, who am I? And from my experiences, like for me personally, it was like I wanted to get to know who I was at my core, not who I was projecting I was through my, let's say, my false facade, through my personality. I don't believe that my personality is who I am. My personality is who I want you to think I am. But who I am at my core, I believe, is how we have all been engineered the same. We're just absolutely beautiful, loving, kind individuals, people, souls that just want two things in life: to love and be loved, to be nourished and nurtured. And we all go about it differently, a large part because of the thoughts and the stories that we create about who we are. And they're not true. Who we think we are and who we are, in my own experience, is very different. And so through learning how to take care of ourselves through nutrition, through movement, and through embracing philosophies such as the three principles, and understanding that when we turn off our thoughts, our life can not only improve, but we could actually have a life beyond our wildest dreams.
Yeah, Jay, I really appreciate you putting it that way, because, you know, for me, I think the turning point was I used to think that I was the content of my thinking, and that what I thought was who I was. And when I started, and that pointed the direction over and over and over again. It pointed back to just me, separate from everyone else. And when I started to understand, look past the content of my thinking to understanding thought, to understanding how thought works in human beings, I saw that the way it works for me is the way it works for every single human being. And the effect that had on me was it stopped pointing the lens on me, and it pointed the lens on what I have in common with every other human being. And I stopped feeling alone. I stopped feeling isolated. I stopped feeling hopeless. I felt connected to everybody and everything. And that was just from the simple shift from focusing on the content of my thinking, which would lead to behavior and personality. And I started looking at the way thought works for all of us, which is it goes up and down. And sometimes we feel fear, and sometimes we feel love, and sometimes we're really in touch with our humanity, and sometimes we're really in touch with our divinity, and it's constantly changing. And when I saw that that was a normal state of affairs, I stopped being afraid of my life and afraid of my thoughts.
That's incredible. That's just amazing, Jason. How have your relationships changed when you gave yourself permission to get out of thought and to connect at a higher level than thought? How have your relationships improved, gotten healthier, or changed?
Oh gosh, what a beautiful question. You know, to me, when I used to focus on the content of my thinking, I just wouldn't feel that connected to people. You know, it would always be on some level kind of a, how am I different? How are my ideas better than, or, you know, different than someone else? And the way it makes sense to me now, which is almost entertaining, is I used to always try and be special. And now I'm really just trying to be ordinary. And the reason for that is I see that that's where we connect to each other, is just being ordinary, being messy, screwing up, picking ourselves up again, going up and down, experiencing the whole range of being human. To me, that feels like being ordinary. And now that I'm looking for that, whereas that used to sound like the last thing in the world that I'd want, I didn't used to want to be ordinary. That sounded like last place. Now being ordinary looks to me like the open door to connect with people. And so I can't tell you the richness that I've experienced since that shift in my life. And I'm a really emotional guy, and I can just get so easily touched by people and their stories and their kindnesses and their struggles. And to me, I just feel like I've tapped into a whole new world of connection and compassion and love and friendship. since I've looked in this direction of how valuable it really is to just be ordinary.
That's amazing. And that is beautiful. I want to close this out by sharing a story that unfolded for me yesterday. I do hike and heal experiences in the mountains of Arizona through Expedia, Orbitz, Travelocity, Airbnb, and through the local resort hotels in town. And yesterday I got booked to do a hike and heal on one of the most difficult trails in the valley. And it's rated extremely difficult, double diamond in the winter months. And so yesterday, a woman showed up with her son, and her son just turned 18 11 days ago. And he's just 2 weeks out of rehab for alcohol and drugs. And we were in this hike. We were in it for about 3 hours at this point, and we had just climbed to the peak of the summit, the second highest peak in the valley. And we stopped, and he and I, see, when we're hiking, I'm coaching, I'm leading, and they're behind me. So a lot of the time, we're not connecting eye to eye. But in this moment, he and I connected. And we already had invested 3 hours in this coaching session together. Extreme heat. It was 87 degrees. There was no shade. And it's a stair climb all the way up. It's a very, very difficult trail. And we connected eye to eye. And what that meant for me was I saw right through his eyes, and we were connected soul to soul. And it was one of when I had that awareness, it was so powerful. I got emotional. I started to cry. And I said to him, I said, are you feeling, you understand what's going on right here? And he didn't blink his eyes. His eyes had not one blink to it. He was so connected. Nor were my eyes, as they are now, blinking. And he said to me, yes, I feel it. And if you got nothing else, it was a 4-hour coaching session that we did together. If you got nothing else, it wasn't my words that I spoke to him, that hopefully I touched him, that I touched him in that heart space, that perhaps maybe for one of the first times in his young 18 years of his life, he was touched by someone that he felt safe with, someone that he was able to connect with. I could tell you, for me, I had never experienced that when I was 17 or 18 or 38 or 48 or 54 years of age. It wasn't until I was in my own healing, truly healing of myself, that I started to experience what connecting with someone can feel like, can be like, that exchange through our eyes. And there's not a better feeling. Now, if I hadn't done the work and showed up for myself and learned how to break free of my personality that I had created for myself to survive and get through life, I would never have been able to touch this young man's soul yesterday. And so for me, that there is not a greater. He asked me at some point on a hike, he says, why do you do what I do? And it wasn't until we connected that I said to him, now you know why I do what I do.
Thanks, Jay. That's really beautiful. And I don't think there's any greater feeling than that, just feeling that deep sense of connection. I'm really grateful that you had that to offer to your client.
Jason Berv, why do you do what you do?
Why do I do what I do? I'd say for really similar reasons, because there's too much suffering in this world that's unnecessary. And for people to see that a different experience of life that's filled with hope and love and connection is so close. It's just, it really is so close, and it doesn't take hard work. And that if I, being so caught up in my world, could experience this kind of shift and have the life that I am blessed with now, it can happen for anybody. So that's why I love to share it.
Thank you, Jason. I want to thank you for coming into the studio today. I've enjoyed our conversation. Love to have you back in the future. Maybe in the future we'll connect on a specific topic, and we'll just hone in and deep dive into that topic, and we'll just continue the conversation this winter. In the meantime, thank you for joining us on Real Men, Real Talk Raw. Later this week, coming in under Real People, Real Health, I've got Melissa Porter coming in from Canada. She is going to share her backstory. She has an incredible story of healing. I believe she had lymphoma or Hodgkin's disease. One of those two. She had cancer that was maybe in stage 3. She got to stage 3, and today she is NED, no evidence of disease. And she's going to come into the studio. I believe it's this Thursday. I'll post the time once I got it dialed down. But she'll be in this week on Real People, Real Health. In the meantime, no matter what you have going on today, I know it's Sunday. It's for some, it's a day of rest. For some, it's a day of chores. I invite you to put down that to-do list. Take some time to move. Take some time to do some self-care, some time to reflect. Some time to take care of yourself, do something for you that helps you feel better about yourself and brings you in a sense of calm, inner peace, joy, and love. And with that, thank you for joining us live on Real Men, Real Talk Raw. We'll catch you next time.